October 1918, Imperial Germany. World War I is nearly over. Almost 2.5 million Germans are dead. The Kaiser has been told the military situation is hopeless. Peace talks with the United States are already underway. But in the upper floors of the Imperial Naval Command, Admiral Reinhard Scheer has other plans. Knowing his government is trying to surrender, Scheer decides to hijack the war. Without authorization, Scheer orders the German High Seas Fleet to sea for one last major battle against the British Royal Navy. They plan to go down, with flags flying. The sailors, however, see it differently. They are not going to be the last to die. They call it a death voyage. Then on October 30th, 1918, in the dark of night, sailors aboard the 3rd Battle Squadron refuse to lift anchor. On the battleships Thüringen and Helgoland, outright mutiny breaks out. For a tense moment, loyalist and rebel ships sit facing each other, cannons trained, waiting for someone to pull the trigger. Faced with open mutiny, Naval Command has no choice. The offensive is called off. The Navy has nearly 200 ringleaders arrested, confident the crisis is contained. 4 days later, on November 3rd, thousands of sailors and workers march on Kiel prison, demanding the release of their comrades. Their slogan, Frieden und Brot, peace and bread. Soldiers guarding the prison, fire warning shots. Then open fire into the crowd. 7 protesters fall dead in the street. 29 are seriously wounded. Some demonstrators fire back. These are the first shots of the German Revolution. The next morning, factory workers across Kiel go on strike. Additional soldiers sent to restore order and crush the rebellion join the march instead. By evening, the city of Kiel is completely captured by 40,000 rebellious sailors, soldiers, and workers. The naval governor, Admiral Souchon, is forced to free the prisoners and asks the insurgents to send a delegation. The rebels elect a soldiers' council and hoist the revolutionary red flag over the battleships of the Imperial Navy. Armed detachments of sailors quickly fan out to every major port city, Lübeck, Bremen, and Hamburg, then inland to Cologne and as far south as Munich. Terrified, King Ludwig III of Bavaria escapes to Austria in the night. He becomes the first German monarch to fall. Then, on November 9th, the revolution reaches the capital, Berlin. Friedrich Ebert, leader of the moderate left-wing Social Democratic Party, sends an urgent message. If the emperor does not abdicate, the social revolution is unavoidable. By the afternoon, Kaiser Wilhelm II, the German emperor, is out of time. Terrified of a Russian-style communist takeover, his Chancellor, Prince Max of Baden, does the unthinkable. He announces the Kaiser's abdication to the press before Wilhelm has a chance to agree. Stripped of his crown, the Kaiser boards a train for exile to the Netherlands, never to return. By the end of November, every dynastic ruler in Germany has abdicated. 400 years of Hohenzollern rule is over. Not in fire and blood, but quietly, like rotten timber giving way. What began with a few sailors refusing to sail has brought down an empire in just 9 days. But hundreds of miles away from the chaos, a 29-year-old corporal lies in total darkness. His eyes are bandaged, blinded by British mustard gas. His name is Adolf Hitler. Word reaches his bed that the Kaiser has fallen. Germany has surrendered, overthrown by its own people. He is utterly devastated, trapped in the darkness of his own mind, unable to see the world as it is. He begins to envision a terrifying new one. When the German Revolution spreads, there is no orderly transfer of power. The monarchy simply vanishes. And in its place, a fragile, improvised democracy struggles to its feet. But from day one, this new government is born under siege, hunted by radical Marxists on the left and vengeful nationalists on the right. This chaotic, broken experiment will become known as the Weimar Republic. On June 28, 1919, Weimar delegates sign the devastating Treaty of Versailles, and the terms are severe. Germany is instantly stripped of 13% of its territory, wiping a tenth of its population off the map. Its ally, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, is completely carved up into new nations: Austria, Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and Yugoslavia. Next, Allied forces will march in to occupy the industrial Rhineland. The German military is dismantled, capped at a mere 100,000 men. No tanks, no submarines, and no air force. Germany is slapped with a massive war reparations bill of 132 billion gold marks, roughly 120% of the country's entire national income. The bill is so mathematically impossible that Britain's leading economist, John Maynard Keynes, walks out of the talks in protest. He issues a chilling warning: this treaty will tear Europe apart. Germany would not make its final payment on this debt until the year 2010. But the financial ruin isn't what cuts deepest. It's Article 231, the War Guilt Clause. It forces Germany to accept sole responsibility for starting the war. To millions of Germans, this is a monstrous lie, an insult pressed into law. And here, in the bitterness of Versailles, a toxic myth takes root. Germany's generals, unable to admit defeat on the battlefield, claim the army was never beaten. Instead, they engineer a lie: that the military was stabbed in the back, betrayed from within by cowardly politicians, by communists, and by Jews. The military, they insist, was invincible. The home front was not. It was a lie, but it did not need to be true, because in the wreckage of a shattered nation, millions will choose to believe it. The Weimar Republic is born into a storm it will never escape. From day one, enemies close in from all sides. On the left, communist revolutionaries, inspired by the Bolshevik uprising in Russia, fight to seize power in the streets. On the right, nationalist paramilitary groups like the Freikorps and the newly formed Nazi stormtroopers battle them in the same streets, convinced that the Republic itself is a betrayal. The violence quickly turns deadly for top officials. Finance Minister Matthias Erzberger is assassinated in August of 1921. Foreign Minister Walter Rathenau is gunned down in June of 1922. Their crime? Negotiating with the Allies over reparations. Shockingly, the old imperial judges hand down sentences so lenient they practically amount to acquittals. The message is clear. In Weimar Germany, political murder is barely a crime. By 1923, Germany falls behind on its coal deliveries to France, part of its reparation payments. And on January 11th, 60,000 French and Belgian troops march into the Ruhr Valley, part of Germany's industrial Rhineland, to seize its coal payments by force. The occupation force includes colonial troops from French Africa, like the Senegalese tirailleurs. Desperate to whip up public fury, the German government launches a vicious, deeply racist propaganda campaign, labeling it the Black Horror on the Rhine. Instead of fighting back with guns, Berlin orders a total passive resistance. Workers dropped their tools, and railwaymen refused to move French trains. The French retaliate by arresting strikers and expelling tens of thousands of families from their homes. Sabotage explodes, and 137 German civilians are killed in the chaos. To keep the striking workers fed and paid, the Weimar government reaches for the only tool it has left, the printing press. They flood the country with unbacked cash and unleash a monster. By late 1923, hyperinflation has made the German mark completely worthless. A single loaf of bread costs billions. Shopping for basic groceries requires a wheelbarrow just to haul the cash, with prices doubling every few days. At the absolute peak, $1 is equal to 4.2 trillion marks. Families burn paper banknotes as fuel for their stoves instead of buying firewood. The life savings of an entire middle class vanishes in a matter of months. By September, the government calls off the strike. The resistance has cost more than the actual reparations, and the economy is in total ruins. Out of this despair, a dangerous new voice finds an audience. His name is Adolf Hitler. He is now 34 years old, Austrian-born, a veteran of World War I, and consumed by the stab-in-the-back myth. That Germany's defeat was a betrayal, engineered from within, by enemies of the German people. Hitler has taken control of a fringe political group in Munich, renamed it the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or the Nazi Party. And he discovers a terrifying talent. He can manipulate crowds.
Vor uns liegt Deutschland, in uns marschiert Deutschland und hinter uns kommt Deutschland.
In October 1923, inspired by Mussolini's recent march on Rome, and convinced that the Weimar government is on the verge of collapse, Hitler and 600 armed stormtroopers attempt a violent coup in Munich, the Beer Hall Putsch. Announcing a national revolution, a chaotic gun battle erupts, leaving 16 Nazis and 4 police officers dead. The coup fails within hours. Hitler is arrested, tried for treason, and sentenced to 5 years in prison. The conservative judiciary is sympathetic to his cause. He serves just 9 months. Inside his prison cell, he writes his blueprint for power, Mein Kampf, my struggle. He lays it all out in plain print. He blames the Jews for Germany's suffering, demands the destruction of the Versailles Treaty, and calls for the violent conquest of Lebensraum, living space, in the East. At the expense of the Slavic peoples he considers racially inferior. Most dismiss him as a harmless lunatic. It will become the costliest mistake in human history. In December 1924, Hitler walks out of prison into a Germany that has completely changed. The hyperinflation crisis is over, rescued by American money. Under the Dawes Plan, US loans flood the country, and a new gold-backed currency, the Rentenmark, stabilizes the economy. Almost overnight, the bleeding stops, factories reopen, and unemployment falls. Germany finally breathes. Driven by newfound freedom from censorship, 1920s Berlin quickly becomes Europe's avant-garde capital, a whirlwind of experimental cinema, Bauhaus design, and a cabaret nightlife that openly pushes the boundaries of gender and sexuality. It was celebrated as a golden age. But to millions of traditional conservative Germans, it felt like a horrifying moral collapse. As Berlin danced, a deep, vengeful right-wing backlash was brewing in the provinces. In the political sphere, the extremes quiet down. Support for the communists and the Nazis alike collapses. In the 1928 elections, Hitler's party wins just 2.6% of the vote, he is a marginal figure. Learning from his mistake during the beer hall putsch, Hitler realizes that violent coups do not work. If he is going to destroy German democracy, he will have to use democracy to do it. He must win the popular vote. He spends these next quiet years rebuilding. He systematically transforms the Nazi Party from a chaotic street gang into a highly disciplined national political machine. He courts wealthy industrialists for funding. He builds strategic alliances with conservative politicians. And before small but growing crowds, he perfects his oratory. He is simply waiting for the country to need him again. It won't have to wait long. On October 24th, 1929, the New York Stock Exchange collapses. In a single day, billions of dollars in value vanish. The Great Depression ripples across the globe. No country is hit harder than Germany. Vital American loans are pulled overnight. German banks default and assembly lines grind to a halt. By 1932, unemployment skyrockets to a staggering 40%. 6 million Germans are completely out of work, surviving on charity. Starving and desperate, the German people turn to the political fringes. The Communist Party surges, and the Nazi Party grows even faster. Only a foolish optimist can deny the dark realities of the moment. This nation asks for action, and action now. President Roosevelt speaks those words about America, but they capture the German mood exactly. The German people are done with political debates. They want force. They want immediate action. Hitler offers both, wrapped in the language of national destiny. To sell this vision, the Nazis launched the most sophisticated propaganda blitz the world has ever seen. Led by Joseph Goebbels, the party floods the country with millions of pamphlets, striking artwork, and desperate slogans like "Bread and Work" and "Our Last Hope." They print their own radical newspapers, like Der Angriff, The Attack. Its pages are weaponized to exploit local grievances, run insulting caricatures, and blame communists, the government, and Jews for Germany's suffering. But Goebbels' true masterpiece is the spectacle. The Nazis pioneer massive, meticulously staged nighttime rallies. Surrounded by a sea of swastikas, lit by towering spotlights and thousands of blazing torches, Hitler is presented not as a politician, but as a godlike savior for a dying nation. In a campaign called Hitler Over Germany, he becomes the first politician to charter private airplanes, racing across the skies to as many as 5 cities a day to speak to millions. Yet, the most calculated part of the strategy happens in the city streets. Nazi brown-shirt paramilitaries actively instigate violence and beat up political rivals, while at the same time running a campaign to bring back law and order. By manufacturing mass violence and hatred with one hand, the Nazi Party can turn to a terrified middle class with the other and promise peace. Across the world, global security is fracturing. In 1931, Japanese officers stage a false flag attack on a railway in Manchuria, using it to invade Chinese territory and conquer an area the size of France and Germany combined. The League of Nations deliberates at length and does nothing. Japan simply walks out of the League with 0 consequences. In Berlin, radical nationalists watch this international weakness and learn a dangerous lesson. The world will not stop them. In Germany's 1932 elections, the Nazis become the largest party in the Reichstag. They do not have a majority, but no one does. The democratic center has completely collapsed, leaving the parliament paralyzed. Behind closed doors, elite conservative politicians make a fatal calculation. They decide to harness Hitler's popularity by putting him in office, confident they can control him. On January 30th, 1933, President Paul von Hindenburg, 85 years old, war hero, and the last living symbol of the old Germany, appoints Adolf Hitler, Chancellor of the Reich. The conservative establishment believes they have tamed a lion. Hitler has only 2 Nazi ministers in his cabinet. He is surrounded by experienced politicians. Hindenburg holds the presidency, and the army stands apart. They tell themselves everything will be fine. 6 weeks later, the night of February 27th, the Reichstag is intentionally set on fire. The German parliament goes up in flames. A young Dutch communist named Marinus van der Lubbe is found inside. The Nazis do not hesitate. Blaming the communists, Hitler demands emergency powers. With a single stroke of a pen, the freedoms of speech, press, and assembly are permanently suspended. Nazi stormtroopers flood the streets, terrorizing voters and crushing opposition rallies. Within weeks, all rival political parties are banned. The first concentration camps open in Dachau and Oranienburg, built not yet as death factories, but as places to vanish political opponents, journalists, and union leaders. By April 1st, a nationwide boycott hits Jewish businesses. New draconian laws strip Jewish doctors, lawyers, and civil servants of their licenses, their jobs, and eventually their citizenship. In June of 1934, Hitler consolidates his power in a single bloody weekend, the Night of the Long Knives. The entire leadership of his own paramilitary group, the Brown Shirts, along with at least 400 political rivals and old enemies, are systematically murdered. Speaking to the Reichstag, Hitler proudly declares himself the administrator of justice. The German army watches the slaughter and says nothing. When President Hindenburg dies in August of 1934, Hitler simply abolishes the presidency. Germany is no longer a democracy. The totalitarian Third Reich is born. The conservatives who put him there stare at what they have created. Hitler is now the absolute dictator, the Führer of Germany, and it took only 18 months. In Britain, a conservative MP named Winston Churchill rises in Parliament to warn his colleagues of what is happening across the Channel. He speaks of Germany's grim dictatorship and the return of its militaristic spirit. His colleagues listen politely, then return to their other concerns. Hitler inherits an economy in absolute ruins. 6 million unemployed, skyrocketing national debt, and a population on the edge of despair. To survive, he launches what he calls the Arbeitsschlacht, the battle for work. Enormous state-funded public works projects roll out across the country. The crown jewel is the Autobahn, 2,400 miles of highway, built not just for transit, but as an example of Nazi engineering and progress. Alongside it, massive stadiums and brutalist government buildings rise from the ground. The propaganda message blasted to the world is clear: Germany is back. To ordinary Germans, the recovery feels entirely real. Within just a few years, the unemployment numbers drop, factories restart, and steady wages finally return. For a people who spent a decade starving under democracy, dictatorship suddenly looks like a miracle. But the entire economic miracle is a dangerous illusion built on hidden debt. Behind the scenes, the regime uses a shadow currency called MEFO bills to print money that doesn't exist, hiding massive military spending from the official books. Every single Reichsmark is funneled toward war. Shell companies are set up. Light and medium tanks, like the Panzer, are manufactured in secret. officially disguised as agricultural tractors. An illegal air force takes shape inside a network of civilian flying clubs. The Third Reich is rearming at breakneck speed while publicly lying to the world that it's complying with Versailles. The head of the Luftwaffe, Hermann Göring, broadcast the regime's true priorities on national radio. Guns will make us powerful. Butter will only make us fat. To manipulate the economic data, women are pushed out of the workforce through state-funded marriage loans, completely removing them from unemployment tracking. Drafted young men and political enemies, forced into hard labor schemes, are magically counted as full-time workers. In reality, Germany's true unemployment rate is double the official figures. Simultaneously, successful Jewish businesses are violently confiscated and handed over to loyal Nazi Party members. An entire class of deeply rooted, skilled citizens is robbed of everything they own. In 1935, the persecution becomes law with the Nuremberg laws. Jews are stripped of German citizenship, and marriage between Jews and non-Jews is strictly criminalized. A formal racial hierarchy is written directly into German statutes, rendering 500,000 people stateless in their own homeland. The economy looks booming, the buildings are soaring, and the crowds are cheering. But the entire foundation is hollow, financed by a mountain of debt that is rapidly running out of time. Hitler has backed himself into a financial corner, and there is only one way out: through brutal foreign conquest. By 1935, Hitler is ready to show his hand, at least partially. He steps before the cameras and proudly announces the existence of the Luftwaffe, boasting an illegal fleet of 2,500 combat aircraft. That same week, he reintroduces mandatory conscription to expand the army, capped at 100,000 men, to 300,000, far beyond its treaty limits. Britain and France send a formal written protest, and then do absolutely nothing. In March 1936, Hitler takes his biggest gamble yet. He orders 20,000 German troops to march into the Rhineland, the strictly demilitarized buffer zone on France's border. This blatantly violates both the Versailles Treaty and the Locarno Pact of 1925. It is a moment of pure terror for Hitler, as he recounts. The 48 hours after the march into the Rhineland were the most nerve-wracking in my life. If the French had marched into the Rhineland, we would have had to withdraw with our tails between our legs. France has 100 combat-ready divisions available, but France refuses to act, and Britain urges restraint. For Hitler, the lesson is clear. The Western democracies will write strongly worded letters, but they will never actually fight. That summer, Berlin hosts the 1936 Olympic Games. The regime temporarily tears down its anti-Jewish signs, presenting a clean, modern, and peaceful face to the world. Jesse Owens wins 4 gold medals. Hitler charms foreign diplomats, and international newsreels report back that perhaps Germany has been misunderstood. Meanwhile, Spain explodes into a brutal civil war between a left-wing Republican government and General Franco's nationalist rebels. Hitler seizes the opportunity. He sends aircraft, tanks, and 19,000 troops to support Franco, not out of ideological solidarity, but to field test his new weapons and train his combat pilots for the real war ahead. In April 1937, the German Condor Legion, along with Italian warplanes, carries out the world's first major aerial bombardment of civilians. The market town of Guernica is reduced to absolute rubble, killing 300 people. Though the shock of the attack, later immortalized by Picasso, resonates far beyond the death toll, it offers a terrifying preview of modern total war. The world recoils in shock, and then looks away. By 1938, Hitler shifts from reclaiming old land to outright conquest. His first target is his own birthplace, Austria. In his geopolitical fantasy, Austria and Germany belong together as a single state, known as the Anschluss. Following increasing violence and demands from Hitler that Austria come back home to the realm, Austrian Chancellor Kurt von Schuschnigg makes a desperate move. He calls for a national referendum to prove to the world his country wants independence. Enraged, Hitler moves quickly to crush the vote. The German Ministry of Propaganda issues fake news reports that riots have broken out across Austria, and that thousands of Austrians are calling for German troops to restore order. Then on March 12th, a day before the national vote, 35,000 German troops roll across the Austrian border. Instead of bullets, they are met with cheering crowds and flowers. Within hours, Austria ceases to exist as an independent state, absorbed into what Hitler now calls the Greater German Reich. In London and Paris, there is deep unease, but Austria, after all, is German-speaking. Surely self-determination applies. Hitler immediately turns to Czechoslovakia, specifically to the Sudetenland, a mountainous region of the country inhabited by 3 million ethnic Germans who had been part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire before the war. Hitler manufactures an international crisis, screaming that these Germans are being tortured by the Czech government. The Czechs refuse to back down. Its army, large, well-equipped, and dug into formidable frontier fortifications, mobilizes. For a moment, Europe teeters on the edge of total war. Then, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain decides to act as a peacemaker. He flies to Germany twice to meet with Hitler face to face. The conversations are not negotiations. They are capitulations dressed as diplomacy. Hitler tells Chamberlain that the Sudetenland is his final territorial demand. He says it with apparent sincerity. On September 29th, 1938, the Munich Conference concludes. France and Britain sign an agreement handing the Sudetenland over to Germany. Czechoslovakia, whose borders are being dismantled, is not invited to the conference. She is simply informed of the result. Chamberlain flies back to London to a cheering crowd, waving a piece of paper with Hitler's signature, and declares, "I believe it is peace for our time." The very next day in the House of Commons, Winston Churchill delivers a blistering reality check. "We have sustained a total and unmitigated defeat, and do not suppose that this is the end. This is only the beginning of the reckoning." The politicians boo Churchill, calling him a warmonger. On October 1st, German troops occupy the Sudetenland. Czechoslovakia's frontier fortifications, the very defenses that might have stopped Germany, fall into German hands without a single shot fired. Chamberlain's piece of paper lasts exactly 5 months. On March 15th, 1939, German armor rolls into Prague, occupying the rest of Czechoslovakia. There are no ethnic Germans to liberate here, no language justification. This is pure imperial conquest. It is the moment that even the most determined appeasers can no longer deny. Hitler's word means nothing. Britain and France issue formal protests. Hitler ignores them. He has already moved on to his next target, Poland. Hitler demands the immediate return of Danzig, a free city on the Baltic, formerly German, now under League of Nations administration, and the Polish corridor, the strip of land that separates East Prussia from the rest of Germany. The Poles, who have watched what happened to Austria and Czechoslovakia, refuse. This time, Britain and France draw a line in the sand. On March 31st, 1939, they issue a formal guarantee. If Germany attacks Poland, they will declare war. Hitler remains unimpressed. He has watched these men for 6 years. He knows what their guarantees are worth. But there is still one massive problem on the map: the Soviet Union. If Hitler invades Poland, he risks a confrontation with Stalin's massive Red Army. A two-front war, the exact nightmare that destroyed Germany in World War I, must be avoided at all costs. What happens next shocks the world. On August 23, 1939, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, ideological enemies who have spent years denouncing each other, sign a non-aggression pact. Publicly, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, which promises 10 years of peace between the two regimes. But hidden inside is a secret protocol designed to carve up Eastern Europe. Germany and the USSR agree to split Poland right down the middle. The western portion to Germany, the eastern to the Soviets. The Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania fall to Stalin's sphere of influence. In London and Paris, the announcement lands like a physical blow. The one strategic card that might have restrained Hitler, the threat of a Soviet counterweight, has been removed. The road to Poland is wide open. On the evening of August 31st, 1939, German SS operatives stage one final false flag operation, codenamed Großmutter gestorben, grandmother died. The Nazi Gestapo dress German concentration camp prisoners in Polish uniforms, shoot them, disfigure their faces to prevent identification, and leave the bodies at a German radio station near the Polish border. Here is the evidence of a Polish attack on German territory. Hitler has his justification. At 4:45 in the morning on September 1st, 1939, 1.5 million Nazi troops storm the Polish border. Supported by 2,750 tanks and 2,300 combat aircraft, executing their Blitzkrieg strategy. Warsaw holds out for weeks, its defenders, soldiers and civilians alike, fighting with desperation. But then Göring orders the largest aerial bombing raid in human history up to that point. Thousands of pounds of high explosives and incendiary bombs rain down on the Polish capital, turning the city into an inferno. Then, on September 17th, Soviet forces cross into eastern Poland, fulfilling their half of the secret deal with Hitler. Poland is now being consumed from both sides simultaneously. When Warsaw finally falls, Hitler travels to the smoldering ruins. Standing in the debris created by his own bombers, he turns to his officers around him and says, "This is the real meaning of war." Britain and France honor their guarantee and declare war on Germany. But it is already too late for Poland. The nation vanishes in a matter of weeks. Churchill, newly appointed to the War Cabinet, broadcasts a defiant message to a terrified world. Poland has been overrun by two of the great powers which held her in bondage for 150 years, but were unable to quench the spirit of the Polish nation. The heroic defense of Warsaw shows that the soul of Poland is indestructible. Directions have been given by the government to prepare for a war of at least 3 years. "20 years. That is all it took. 20 years to travel from the humiliated armistice at Compiègne to the obliterated ruins of Warsaw. 20 years to transform a broken, bankrupt nation with a dismantled military into the most terrifying industrial war machine on earth. It did not happen by accident. It was built, brick by brick, by a man who wrote down exactly what he intended to do and was not believed. The economic miracle that supposedly saved Germany was always a lie. It was a mechanism engineered from day one to consume the planet. The highways were never built for family vacations. The factories were never meant for civilian prosperity. Every single mark spent, every job created, was aimed at a single outcome: total war. At a dozen different flashpoints over 2 decades, humanity could have stood up and chosen a different path. But it didn't. And that is the ultimate warning of history. Not that evil is unstoppable, but that if it is left alone long enough, it becomes very hard to stop.
If you enjoyed this journey through history, consider subscribing to Clear and Present History for more documentaries, biographies, and untold stories from the past. And if you believe the lessons of history still matter, becoming a supporting member on YouTube helps us go deeper, funding the research and production that allow us to preserve the hard-won wisdom of the past. From all of us at Clear and Present History and myself, Stephen Christoph, thank you. Until next time.